At our annual Christmas dinner, my parents gifted my adopted brother a $20,000 check to help him set up his business while I received nothing, and in their speech, they called me a mistake because of my disability in front of everyone, and said my brother came as a blessing to them. A little later, my estranged aunt knocked at my door, showed me an old letter revealing this shocking family secret. I'm Mike, 20 male. If you saw me, you'd probably think I'm just an ordinary guy. Someone who enjoys a good laugh, quiet afternoon, or just a solid drama-free life. But the one constant thing I've learned growing up, my family doesn't seem to believe in drama-free. In fact, they thrive on making things complicated. So the big family Christmas dinner was coming up. This is an event that happens every year, a time when my parents put on this extravagant display of love and generosity, but only for the people they deem worthy of it. Don't get me wrong, I show up, smile and play my part. But this year was different. My parents had this big plan, this surprise that they just couldn't stop hinting at. And knowing them, I had a feeling it wouldn't be good news for me. The night started with the usual formalities. Mom and Dad, both in their finest holiday outfits, played the role of doting parents as if there were no issues between us. My adopted brother, Sam, sat across from me smiling away. Sam's 3 years older than me, adopted into the family when he was just a baby, and he's always been the golden child. To my parents, he could do no wrong. Me though, they've never tried to hide how they feel. So there we were, halfway through dinner, when my parents got up for their big speech. I kept eating, pretending to ignore them, hoping this speech would be like all the others they'd made before, just a lot of praise for everyone but me. But then, they announced it. My mom cleared her throat, her voice echoing through the room with this fake warmth that only people who knew her well would recognize. She and my dad launched into a long speech about family values and overcoming challenges together. They kept throwing side glances at Sam, who nodded along like he already knew what was coming. Finally, the moment came, and with a flourish, my dad took out an envelope and held it up for everyone to see, as if it were some kind of trophy. "This," he said with a smile, "is for our son, Sam. He's worked so hard and shown us what it means to be a true son, a blessing in every way." I didn't look up, trying to keep my face blank as they handed Sam the envelope. I could feel every eye at the table on me, like they were waiting for a reaction. But I knew better by now than to give them one. I just stared down at my plate, pushing the mashed potatoes around with my fork, trying to act like I didn't care. But inside, it stung. It stung like it always had. I heard my mom continue, her voice suddenly louder. "We couldn't be more proud of Sam," she said, her tone turning serious. "He came to us at just the right time, a true blessing from above." Unlike, she paused, glancing in my direction, her eyes cold. Well, unlike some unexpected surprises, I felt my stomach drop. I'd heard it all before, the little digs, the comments that reminded me I was different. But hearing her call me a mistake in front of everyone, that was new. And the worst part was, she didn't even seem to care that I was sitting right there listening. She kept talking about Sam, how proud they were of him, how he'd been their light during difficult times. She said when Sam came into their lives, they finally felt like a family. It was like the missing piece had fallen into place. I sat there in silence, my face growing hot as everyone hesitantly clapped. I didn't dare look up. All I could think about was how badly I wanted to disappear, to just get up and walk out of there without looking back. But I knew that would only make things worse. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that showing them how much they hurt me just gives them more satisfaction. So I sat there staring at my plate, pretending I was somewhere else, somewhere far away from this mess. After a few minutes, the conversation picked back up. I could feel the curious glances from my relatives, some pitying, others maybe a little embarrassed for me. But not one person said a thing. Not a single one of them stood up for me. They all just carried on acting like it was perfectly normal for my parents to treat me like that. Eventually, the night wound down. Sam was still grinning, practically glowing from all the praise. He didn't even look at me as he pocketed the check. I guess in his mind, I'd always been the afterthought, just like my parents wanted me to feel. I made my way out as soon as I could. I didn't have the energy to pretend anymore, to plaster on that fake smile and act like everything was fine. I felt hollow inside, numb in a way that only years of being treated like a mistake could make you feel. When I got home that night, I sat down on the couch. My mind was racing. I couldn't shake the feeling of shame and anger that had been building up inside me for years, now boiling to the surface. All I wanted was for someone, anyone, to see me, to see what I was going through, to just care. But as far as my family was concerned, I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a reminder of something they'd rather forget. At this point, should I even try? Okay. So just as I was about to go to bed that night, there was a knock at my door. I froze, my heart racing. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was late, too late for visitors. Cautiously, I opened the door and there she was, my aunt, the one family member I hadn't seen in years, the one who'd practically disappeared from our lives when I was young. She looked at me with this strange mix of sympathy and determination, holding an old crumpled envelope in her hand. "Mike," she said softly, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "I need to talk to you. There's something you need to know. Something your parents never told you." And that was it. At that moment, my aunt, standing there with that mysterious envelope in her hand, changed everything. My aunt stepped into my apartment, her face a mix of urgency and something softer, maybe sympathy. I'd hardly seen her over the years yet. Somehow tonight felt like she was the only one who truly shown up for me. I didn't know what she had to say, but I could tell it was serious. She handed me an envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. She said that she knew it was late but couldn't let another day go by without giving this to me. She said that this letter had been waiting a long time and that it was from my grandmother. I took the envelope slowly, feeling a strange mix of dread and curiosity. I asked her, "Why now?" my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, glancing down at her hands before looking back at me. "Because I heard what they said about you tonight, and it was wrong." There was a fierce edge in her voice that caught me off guard. "Your grandmother always saw your worth, Mike. She wrote this letter for you in case they never came around." Yes. She was there for dinner, which was surprising, but I didn't get a chance to talk to her. She's very introverted and I had my own drama to deal with. I looked down at the envelope, feeling its worn edges as though it had been carried around for years, waiting for this moment. Something told me that whatever was inside was more than just words. I glanced back up at my aunt, who nodded, giving me the quiet encouragement I needed. Taking a deep breath, I opened it. Inside was a single page, yellowed with age, written in a flowing script I recognized from the cards she used to send. As I read the words, I could feel the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The letter explained that my parents had never wanted a second child. They'd nearly given me up, hoping to focus solely on their perfect firstborn, my brother. But my grandmother, horrified, had stepped in, insisting that I deserved a place in the family regardless of my parents' wishes. She had even quietly helped financially over the years, keeping me clothed and fed when my parents fell short. It made my heart ache to think she'd been the one holding me up all this time. But there was more. My grandmother had set aside a trust for me, a substantial one, apparently, with instructions that I was to receive it when I turned 21. She'd been afraid that my parents might interfere, so she'd left it in my aunt's hands with strict instructions that I'd get it when the time was right. My head was spinning. All my life, I'd sensed something was off, that I was a burden rather than a blessing. Now I had proof. But more than that, I had the words of someone who'd loved me, someone who had fought for me when I was too young to understand. I looked up at my aunt, who had been watching me with an expression of sorrow and compassion. I asked if this was really true, my voice wavering. She nodded, reaching out to touch my shoulder. She said that my grandmother loved me deeply. Even if my parents didn't show it, she saw my strength, my kindness, and she knew I deserved better. The realization hit me like a wave, and I struggled to keep my composure. All those years, I'd felt alone in that house, like an outsider looking in. But knowing my grandmother had been there, silently fighting for me, gave me a feeling I'd never felt before. My arm squeezed my shoulder, grounding me back in the moment. She said that I was not alone and that I had her, and that if I needed anything, she's here. I felt a glimmer of hope after that disastrous dinner, like maybe I didn't have to face all of this by myself. Maybe I could finally confront my parents with the strength I'd been missing all these years, now that I knew someone believed in me. I folded the letter carefully, holding on to it like a lifeline. "Thank you," I said, looking at her with all the gratitude I could muster. "Thank you for being here, for everything." The next day felt surreal after that conversation. I spent most of it processing the revelation from my aunt. I had gone to bed with a heart, heavy with anger and confusion, but woke up feeling a spark of determination. For the first time, I had something to fight for, my self-worth, my future, and the truth. It was like the clouds had finally parted, revealing a path I never knew existed. As I got ready for dinner at my parents' house, I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. I was nervous about facing them, especially after everything my aunt had revealed. The holiday spirit felt oddly stifled by the weight of what I now knew. My parents were going to act like everything was normal, but I could sense the tension simmering just beneath the surface. I could almost feel the electric charge in the air, as if the very atmosphere knew a storm was brewing. When I arrived, the decorations sparkled cheerfully in the light. Brightly colored ornaments hung from the tree and the scent of roasted turkey wafted through the air. I could hear my mother bustling around the kitchen, laughing and chatting with my father. It was a stark contrast to the turmoil roiling inside me. I had spent my entire life trying to fit into this picture-perfect family, but now I felt like an imposter ready to tear the facade apart. During dinner, the tension escalated and I became hyper-aware of my parents' behavior. My mother was trying too hard to maintain a facade of normalcy, cracking jokes, making small talk, but her eyes darted nervously towards me, betraying her unease. My adopted brother sat across from me, blissfully unaware of the chaos that was about to erupt. He dug into his plate, seemingly enjoying the moment, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of resentment. It was as if he was living in a different world, one where our parents only cared about him. As my father cut into his meal, he asked if I'd received any job offers yet, his tone casual, but laced with mockery. The question was just another reminder of how he saw my so-called failures, and it took everything in me not to roll my eyes. It was as if they expected me to be grateful for whatever crumbs they tossed my way. I told him I was still looking, forcing the words out, feeling the familiar pressure build in my chest. My mother chimed in saying I should take my time, her voice dripping with insincerity. She added that they wouldn't want me rushing into anything permanent, the emphasis on that word hitting me hard, and I fought to keep my composure. In that moment, I decided I'd had enough. I put my fork down, looked directly at them, and said there was something I needed to discuss. The atmosphere changed instantly. My parents exchanged a look and I could almost sense their silent panic. My mother, trying to sound nonchalant, asked what was going on, but I saw her hands tremble slightly. I told them I'd spoken to Aunt Linda the day before, their faces drained of color. The mere mention of her name seemed to strike a nerve. I added that she'd shown me a letter from Grandma that explained everything. Their expressions hardened, but I pressed on, saying that Aunt Linda had told me how they'd never wanted me, how they'd almost given me up for adoption because I was a mistake, and how Grandma had fought for me because she believed I deserved love. My father scoffed, but I ignored it, determined to speak the truth that had been hidden from me all this time. I went on saying that Grandma had even set up a trust for me, something they'd kept from me my entire life. I told them how they'd made me feel worthless, like I was never supposed to be here, but that Grandma had believed in me and made sure I'd have something of my own. My mother's face turned crimson and for a second I thought she might explode. She snapped that I was making a scene over nothing, that this wasn't the time or place. Her voice was loud, laced with anger, but I wasn't backing down. I told her it wasn't anything, reminding her that she'd called me a mistake and that I was done being her punching bag. I said that they'd hurt me for too long, and I wouldn't let it slide anymore. My father, his voice low and threatening, warned me not to talk to them like that, saying they'd raised me, given me a home, and that I should be grateful. Grateful, I repeated back as anger surged within me. Grateful for what? For years of being belittled, ignored, watching my brother get everything while I was left with nothing? I pointed out that they didn't even try to hide how they looked at me, that I knew I wasn't the favorite. The tension was electric, my mother's face contorting with rage as she declared me ungrateful. She claimed they'd made sacrifices for me, that I didn't understand the pressure they'd faced. She said my brother was the one who deserved support, not me. Her words were drenched in disdain and it only made my fury grow. I asked if that's how she justified it by comparing me to him. Holding back the urge to scream, I told her he hadn't asked for this and neither had I. I told her I didn't choose to be born to them, but I deserved a chance just as much as he did. I could see her composure slipping, her mask cracking. She hissed that I was ruining Christmas, that I should be ashamed of myself, but I felt something shift within me. Freedom. Maybe. I wasn't ashamed. I had every right to stand up for myself and claim my worth, and I wasn't going to let them take that from me anymore. I told her that they were the ones who should be ashamed, that they'd made me feel like an outsider in my own family. I said I wouldn't be silent any longer. Silence settled around us, heavy and tense. I noticed my brother looking between us, confused and fear etched on his face, caught between loyalty to our parents and the reality I had just laid bare. My father, raising his voice in an attempt to intimidate me, demanded to know if I thought this was over, if I thought I could just walk in and turn their lives upside down. I told him it wasn't me who had done that. It was them. They turned my life upside down long ago, and now it was my turn to take control. My voice was steady and clear, and I felt empowered by my own words. I glanced at my brother and saw the bewilderment in his eyes, as if he was struggling to grasp the fallout of this confrontation. The room was tense, thick with emotions I'd kept locked away for years. My mother sneered, calling me dramatic, adding that I'd always been good at that. I shook my head, no longer letting her words get under my skin. I told her I wasn't being dramatic, just finally being honest. For once in my life, I was standing up for myself. My father barked back that nothing would change, that I was still their son and that I couldn't erase the past with my complaints. He leaned forward, face hard with anger, almost daring me to argue. Maybe I didn't want to be their son anymore, I said, surprising, even myself. The thought was liberating in a way I hadn't anticipated. I told him I was done being their scapegoat, done with their games. My mother's voice dropped, dangerous and warning. She said I regret this, that I was throwing away my family for a fantasy. I met her gaze unwavering and told her I wasn't throwing anything away. I was reclaiming my life, saying that I didn't need her approval to define who I was. They'd already made their feelings about me crystal clear. With that, I stood, letting my chair scrape against the floor as I left the room. The cool night air greeted me as I stepped outside, and I took a deep breath, savoring the feeling of having finally spoken my truth. Grandma's love felt like a warm presence around me. Just a letter, but it was a reminder that I was worthy of love and acceptance. The aftermath of that dinner hung in the air like a storm cloud, thick with tension and unresolved emotions. I'd left my parents' house with a rush of adrenaline, but now the reality of what I had done settled heavily on my shoulders. I felt excited, but now I had to deal with the consequences. The following days were a whirlwind. My parents, true to form, tried to sweep everything under the rug. They called to check in, feigning concern, but I could hear the underlying anger in their voices. They wanted me to pretend that nothing had changed, that I was still their obedient son who would accept their narrative without question. My mother sent me a text asking if I could come over for dinner again, claiming she missed me. I could almost hear her voice dripping with false sweetness, but I wasn't falling for it. I was done with them. Either they want me or they don't. I didn't understand this in between anything that they had going on. Meanwhile, word had spread through the family about the dinner debacle. I knew I had cousins and relatives whispering behind my back, some supporting me, others siding with my parents. I wasn't ready for the backlash, but I couldn't ignore it. My Aunt Linda had become my ally, encouraging me to stand firm. "You deserve to be heard, Mike. Don't let them silence you again," she urged during our calls. And then came the day of the family gathering, a post-New Year brunch my parents insisted on hosting. I knew they were trying to regain control of the narrative to spin their version of events while acting as though everything was perfectly normal. I almost didn't want to go, but I felt an inexplicable pull to confront them in front of the family. I wanted them to see that I wouldn't back down. As I walked into my parents' home, the usual warmth felt suffocating. The table was laden with food, but the atmosphere was charged with the tension I could taste. My parents wore forced smiles as they greeted the guests, but I noticed how they avoided looking at me directly. My heart raced. I felt a lot of apprehension as I settled into a chair. The gathering began and laughter echoed around the room, but my parents kept stealing glances at me, their eyes flickering with annoyance. I could see the tension building within them, waiting for the right moment to explode. As more family members arrived, it didn't take long for the gossip to stop. I could catch snippets of conversations, how people were talking about the dinner, my outburst, and the bombshell that followed. My brother had let it slip to a cousin of ours. It was surreal to hear my name being tossed around, but I welcomed it. The moment my uncle brought up the letter from Grandma, I saw my parents tense up. He said it was pretty wild that I had a trust fund from her, laughing as he took a sip of his drink. His laughter sounded hollow, and I noticed how my mother's face seemed to lose all color. I took a deep breath, feeling everyone's eyes on me. I confirmed it, saying that, yes, it was true. Apparently, Grandma cared enough to ensure I was taken care of, unlike some people in this family. I let my gaze land on my parents, watching their smiles falter. I added that it wasn't surprising they hadn't wanted me to know. The room fell silent and all eyes turned towards my parents. My mother's jaw clenched, and my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, growling that this wasn't the place for such things, but I wasn't going to let them silence me anymore. I shot back asking why not. Was it because they couldn't handle the truth? My voice rose as I continued calling out the years they had spent making me feel like a mistake. I said I was done with it, done letting them tell me I didn't matter. I deserved to stand up for myself and I didn't care where I was. Mistake? My mother scoffed, her face flushed with anger as she said I was twisting things, that they had always loved me in their own way. Their own way. I let out a bitter laugh, telling her that if their own way meant loving me only when it suited them, I wanted no part of it. I pointed out how they treated me like an outsider while my brother got all the support he needed. Sensing the rising tension, my aunt stepped in, her voice steady and firm as she said this wasn't about picking sides. She added that I deserved to be treated with respect and it was time for them to listen to what I had to say. My parents exchanged a glance, frustration boiling over. My father snapped that this was ridiculous, saying I brought shame to the family. He went on about how hard they had worked to give me a good life, and now I was repaying them with all this disrespect. Shame? I fired back saying if anyone was ashamed, it was me. I was ashamed of how they treated me, letting their biases dictate my worth. I told them I refused to be part of this toxic cycle any longer. Guests around us began to exchange glances, some nodding in agreement, while others looked increasingly uncomfortable. My mother's voice cut through the murmur, desperate as she accused me of ruining the gathering and embarrassing them. Looks like they couldn't muster up anything else to say. Embarrassing for them? I asked. This was about my life, I told her. They had embarrassed me my entire life with the way they treated me. I said I was done being family, done with the silent shame they'd inflicted on me. My father glared, his tone darkening as he called me a boy frying a tantrum, saying I couldn't understand the sacrifices they had made for me. No, I said. They were the ones who didn't understand. They'd manipulated and belittled me all my life to protect their image, but I was no longer theirs to control, and I wouldn't let them dictate my life anymore. That was when the chaos erupted. A few cousins started backing me up, voicing their own frustrations over how my parents had favored my brother all these years, and they had to sit back when I had been nothing but supportive of them because they were told not to interfere. My parents' facade began to crumble as they faced mounting criticism. They tried to push back to deny it, but their words rang hollow against the growing support I felt around me. One cousin spoke up, saying they'd always pitted us against each other, and it was time they faced accountability. My aunt's presence beside me felt like a shield bolstering me as I stood my ground. I told my parents they built their lives on lies and favoritism, and I was finishing letting them determine my worth. I wouldn't be a pawn in their game any longer. What else could I call it if not a game? My mother's face twisted in rage, and she tried to shout over the crowd, accusing me of tearing the family apart. She insisted I wasn't thinking straight. I told her I was thinking more clearly than ever, and I was ready to expose the truth no matter how ugly it got. I was a grown man, no longer the scared child they tried to mold and control. I was a grown man, finally free to reclaim my life. The days following the family gathering were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt lighter, almost giddy. However, it didn't take long for the realities of family dynamics to resurface, and soon I found myself facing a different kind of battle. It was a Friday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a familiar number. My brother. A wave of anxiety washed over me as I contemplated whether to answer. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure what he wanted. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up the call. He said that he needed to talk to me. I replied coolly, asking what he wanted. He told me that things had been crazy since Christmas, but he really needed my help. There was a note of desperation creeping into his voice as he asked if I could lend him some money, explaining that he couldn't go back to mom and dad right now because they were freaking out over me. I hesitated. I asked him if he really thought I would give him money after everything that had happened. What had he spent his check on? He sighed, frustration palpable in his tone as he admitted he had spent it. He said it was supposed to help him get on his feet, but he had gotten caught up in his girlfriend. Caught up? I shot back, unable to contain my anger. You spent $20,000 on your girlfriend and yourself? You're asking me for money after you blew through your savings? That's ridiculous. He replied that he hadn't thought it would go this way. He thought he'd have a job by now, but it hadn't worked out. His voice was rising with urgency as he said he just needed a little help. If he didn't pay his rent, he was going to get kicked out. He begged me not to let mom and dad find out he was struggling because it would ruin him.